She rode toward the cliffs to hide, but the Duke's horse matched her pace without a sound. The wind tore through the cliffs, whipping Seraphine's dark cloak around her as she urged her mare faster. Rain lashed her face, blinding her momentarily, but she did not slow. Every muscle in her body strained as she pushed the horse toward the jagged edge of the northern cliffs, hoping the wild terrain would finally put distance between her and Ashenmore Castle. Her heart hammered like a drum, and the cold fear in her chest threatened to swallow her whole. Seraphine had always known the Duke's reputation. He was a man carved from shadows, the kind whose presence alone could bend a room to silence. But she had not expected him to appear so soon, to move so silently, as if the storm itself carried him forward. A sudden shiver ran down her spine as she heard a sound behind her, a soft, deliberate echo of hoofbeats, perfectly matching her own. At first she convinced herself it was her imagination. The night was alive with the wind, the rain, and the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. But then she heard it again, a quiet rhythm, steady and unyielding, always just behind her, always keeping pace. Her mare snorted, sensing the tension in the air, and Seraphine's pulse jumped. She glanced over her shoulder, heart stopping. There, emerging from the shadows, was the Duke. He sat tall atop a black stallion that seemed almost a part of the night itself. His eyes glimmered with a strange light under the hood of his cloak, and for a moment, Seraphine wondered if he had always been human, or if the legends had been true, that he was something more, something bound to the darkness of the cliffs. "Impossible," she whispered to herself, gripping the reins tightly. But the sight of him drew her fear and fascination together, twisting them into something she could not name. The cliffs rose steeply before her, narrow paths carved into rock and wind. Seraphine's plan had been simple: lose him among the crags and the fog, where no man, no matter how skilled, could follow. Yet as she pushed her mare forward, the Duke's horse mirrored her every movement, silent, perfect, and terrifying. She clenched her teeth, forcing the mare to leap over a fallen tree trunk. The Duke's horse cleared it effortlessly, landing beside her with no sound. He leaned slightly forward, studying her, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a blade. "You run well," he said, his voice low, calm, and almost gentle. It carried over the storm, cutting through the noise of wind and rain. "But you cannot hide from me." Seraphine's jaw tightened. "I do not wish to hide from you," she shouted over the wind. "I wish only to live my own life, free from your control." The Duke's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. "Freedom," he repeated, almost to himself, as if tasting the word. "A dangerous desire for someone in your position." Her blood ran cold, and yet some part of her could not look away. She had been told all her life that the Duke was merciless, cruel, and unyielding. But now, in the storm, she saw something more complex flicker behind his eyes. A shadow of pain, a weight he carried alone. For hours, or maybe minutes, time blurred in the chaos of rain and motion. Seraphine and the Duke rode in silence, the cliffs and jagged rocks around them a blur of gray and black. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the precipice ahead, and for a moment she thought she saw the vast sea below, waves thrashing against the rocks with a fury that mirrored her own heart. The wind drove her onward, forcing her to focus on nothing but the treacherous path. One wrong step could send her tumbling into the abyss. And yet, even as she raced toward what she thought was freedom, the Duke's presence behind her felt like an unbreakable tether. "You do not know who you are running from," he said softly, almost like a warning. "Do you even understand the danger you face?" Seraphine bit her lip, trying to steady her voice. "I understand perfectly. I am running from a man who wishes to take my life, or my will. I will not allow it." He laughed then, a sound that was low and strange, not cruel but not warm either. "You misunderstand. I do not wish your life, but your will, that is another matter entirely." She shivered. His words were not threats exactly, but something heavier, a truth wrapped in inevitability. The cliffs narrowed, jagged rocks forcing her to steer with careful precision. The storm roared around her, whipping rain into her eyes and cutting her vision to slits. And yet, despite every warning, she could not tear her gaze from the shadow behind her, the man who moved as if the darkness itself obeyed him. Then, as if the cliffs themselves had decided, the path became nearly impassable. A fallen boulder blocked the narrow trail, and the mare skidded in the mud. Seraphine pressed her heels to the horse's flanks, urging it forward, but the stallion stumbled slightly. Her heart skipped a beat, and she knew in that moment how fragile her escape truly was. The Duke's horse appeared beside her again, perfectly balanced, a dark echo of her own movements. He did not speak, he only watched, his eyes never leaving hers. In that gaze she saw something she had not expected, patience and perhaps understanding. For the first time, Seraphine hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to turn her horse and dive into the fog below. But the storm, the cliffs, and the strange magnetism of the man behind her forced her to slow, if only for a heartbeat. "You are stronger than most," the Duke said quietly. "Yet still you are running from yourself." The words struck her like lightning. She wanted to deny it, to insist that she ran only from him, but deep inside she knew he was right. Fear had guided her flight, but something else had driven it too: doubt, uncertainty, and a heart unwilling to face the future that had been forced upon her. Seraphine pushed the thought aside, focusing on the narrow path. The mare shivered beneath her, and she felt the cliff's edge brush closer than she liked. One misstep and both of them, herself and the horse, would tumble into the stormy sea below. "Do you think you can outrun me forever?" the Duke asked, his voice calm, almost amused. "The cliffs are merciless. Nature itself will not allow escape." Seraphine's fingers tightened on the reins. "Then I will fight it," she said. "Every step, every breath, I will not yield." His gaze softened, just for a moment, and she caught a flicker of something almost human in his expression. Then the storm claimed his face once more, and the night returned to shadow and wind. Suddenly, lightning struck a rock formation ahead, illuminating the path and revealing a narrow ridge that clung to the cliffside. Seraphine felt her stomach drop. The ridge was treacherous, barely wide enough for her horse's hooves. She knew one slip could end everything. But she had no choice. She leaned forward, urging the mare onto the ridge, and the horse responded, trembling but determined. Behind her, the Duke followed without hesitation, his stallion moving with uncanny precision. The wind screamed past her ears, the sea roared below, and for the first time, Seraphine felt truly alone, not in the sense of being without company, but in the sense of standing against fate itself. And yet, even as she clung to the cliffside, she felt a strange, unexplainable connection to the man behind her. The danger, the storm, the impossibility of escape, it all drew her closer to him, whether she wanted it or not. As they reached the end of the ridge, a sudden gust of wind caught her cloak, whipping it around her and momentarily blinding her. The mare stumbled on the slick stone, and Seraphine's heart lurched. She braced herself for a fall into the black sea below. But a hand, firm, unyielding, human yet strange, gripped her arm. The Duke had reached her side, his presence steady, unshakable amidst the chaos. "Hold," he commanded, his voice calm, carrying over the wind. "Trust me." For a heartbeat, Seraphine allowed herself to do just that. The mare steadied. The wind seemed to pause, and the cliff's edge, the storm, the impossible path. They all became a single moment suspended between fear and trust. Then the storm surged again, louder and more violent, and the edge of the cliff seemed to stretch endlessly. The Duke's horse moved beside her, perfectly in sync, a shadow that mirrored every motion, every heartbeat. Seraphine realized with a mix of terror and awe that there was no path left to run. No matter how far she rode, no matter how fast she fled, the Duke would follow. Not as a pursuer, but as a force that could not be denied, a presence entwined with the cliffs, the wind, and the storm itself. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and her fingers ached from gripping the reins, but one thought burned brighter than fear. If she stopped, if she faced him, would she find freedom, or something far more dangerous, far more consuming? The mare's hooves clattered against stone as Seraphine reached the final curve of the cliffs. The sea crashed below, white spray rising like ghostly fingers, and the wind screamed in her ears. Behind her, the Duke remained, silent and steady, a shadow on a black horse, moving as if the storm itself obeyed him. And for the first time, Seraphine understood the truth she had been running from. Some forces could not be outrun. Some destinies would always find you, no matter how far or how fast. With a shiver, she tightened her grip on the reins and leaned forward, heart pounding, as the cliffs stretched before her like a knife edge of fate. Somewhere ahead, the world held either freedom or the beginning of something far more dangerous. And the Duke, he was already there, waiting in shadow, silent and impossible to ignore. The storm had passed, leaving a mist that clung to the cliffs like a living veil. Seraphine's breath came in ragged gasps, her hands still tight on the reins, as she stared down at the sea below. The waves crashed endlessly against the rocks, white foam leaping like spirits caught in eternal struggle. Somewhere beneath the roar of the water, she thought she could hear whispers, though whether they were real or the wind playing tricks on her mind, she could not tell. The Duke rode beside her, silent, the shadow of his presence almost blending with the dark mist. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, followed her every move. There was no malice in them, at least not the kind she expected, but something else, something sharper and stranger, burned within their depths. Curiosity, recognition. Or perhaps a warning that the world was not as simple as she had thought. Seraphine pulled her horse to a slow walk, unwilling to speak, unwilling to break the fragile tension. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, yet the cliffs offered no path wide enough to escape. And yet she could not ignore the pull that the Duke seemed to exert over her. Something about him, his calm certainty, the way he moved as if he belonged to the storm itself, was almost hypnotic. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling, though she tried to mask it with anger. "Why do you follow me? What do you want from me?" The Duke's gaze softened for a fleeting moment. "I want nothing from you that is not yours to give," he said quietly. "I do not wish to harm you, Seraphine, but you run from more than me. You run from what lies within yourself." Her fingers tightened on the reins. The wind tugged at her hair and cloak, but she refused to look away from his eyes. "I am no one of power," she said. "I am a noblewoman, nothing more, and I will not be bound by fear or by men." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Do not mistake your courage for freedom," he said. "Courage without understanding is a path to ruin. You run not from me, but from the destiny that has chosen you." Seraphine's heart clenched. Destiny. The word carried weight she had long tried to ignore. Her life had been planned by her family, by the court, by rules she had never consented to. And now, as she stood on the edge of cliffs that could easily swallow her, she felt the truth in his words more sharply than ever. "You speak in riddles," she said, her voice rising over the wind. "Do you mean I must accept a life I do not want, that I must bow to a fate chosen for me?" The Duke shook his head slowly. "No, I speak of choice and of responsibility. There are forces in this world, ancient, terrible, that do not bend to desire or defiance. You have been running from them, from the truth of what you are, and from what you might become. That is why you are here on the cliffs with me. Not because I have chased you, but because the world itself has guided you here." Seraphine swallowed hard, her mind racing. His words were strange, almost impossible, and yet they carried a weight she could not ignore. She had always felt different from others, a restless spirit that could not be tamed by luxury, by comfort, or by the endless dances of courtly life. Could it be possible that the Duke was right, that she was more than a noblewoman fleeing an unwanted marriage? She did not have long to ponder. From the mist ahead, a low, distant growl reached her ears, deep and unnatural, vibrating through the stone of the cliffs. Her mare shivered beneath her, ears flat, eyes wide. Seraphine's heart leapt into her throat. She had no idea what lay ahead, but instinct told her that it was not ordinary danger. The Duke's voice cut through the tension, calm and steady. "Stay close to me," he said. "Whatever moves there is not of this world. It is tied to the cliffs, to the land, to the very air we breathe." Seraphine obeyed, pressing her horse alongside his. She noticed for the first time the way his stallion moved, careful, precise, as if sensing danger that no human could see. There was an elegance to it, almost unnatural, yet reassuring. She could feel the Duke's power radiating through him, a quiet control over the chaos that surrounded them. The growl grew louder, closer, and from the mist emerged shapes, twisted forms that moved like shadows, their edges blurring with smoke and rain. Seraphine gasped, clutching the reins. The creatures were unlike anything she had seen, neither fully solid nor entirely spirit. They circled the cliffs, eyes glowing faintly in the gloom, watching, waiting. "They are bound to the land," the Duke said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Cursed remnants of a past long forgotten. They serve only the will of those who understand their true nature." Seraphine's mind raced. "And who understands them?" she asked. "Not many," he said. "I do, and now you." Her breath caught. "Me? Why me?" "Because you are part of this world," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "And because you have power you do not yet see. You have blood of those who could command or break curses, who could shape the fate of more than a kingdom. That is why you are here." Seraphine's head spun. She had always suspected she was different, but this was beyond imagination. And yet, as the creatures moved closer, circling like predators testing their prey, she felt something awaken inside her, a flicker of courage, of strength, of recognition. The Duke's hand brushed against hers as he passed her, a fleeting touch, and Seraphine felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had expected only fear, only command, only control. But there was something else in him, something that hinted at understanding, at protection, at an unspoken bond that had formed in the chase, in the storm, in the shared danger. "We must move forward," he said. "These cliffs are dangerous, but the creatures will not attack unless threatened. We walk the line between life and death here, and you must trust me." Seraphine nodded, her voice caught in her throat. She could not speak, could not articulate the storm of emotions swirling inside her. She trusted him, against reason, against instinct, against every lesson she had ever learned. Together they pressed on, moving along a narrow path carved into the cliffside, mist curling around their feet like living fingers. The creatures followed silently, keeping distance, yet their presence was constant, a reminder that the cliffs held power older than either of them could comprehend. Hours, or maybe it was only minutes, passed in tense silence. Seraphine's muscles ached, her chest burned from fear and effort, but she forced herself to keep moving. Every step forward felt like a test, every glance at the Duke a mixture of caution and fascination. At last, they reached a small plateau, hidden from the cliffs below. The mist swirled and the storm's roar was distant, almost gentle. Seraphine dismounted, her legs trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Her mare nuzzled her hand, and she realized for the first time how tightly she had held on, not just to the reins but to her fear, to her life, to her independence. The Duke dismounted as well, his presence calm and steady. "Rest," he said simply. "But know this, the creatures will not leave. They are bound to you now as you are bound to this place. This is not punishment but awakening." Seraphine looked at him, confused and wary. "Awakening of what?" "The truth of who you are," he said, "and the choices you must make. You cannot flee them any longer." A strange silence fell over the plateau. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, the mist curling like smoke around them. Seraphine felt the weight of his words, heavy and impossible to ignore. For the first time in her life, she realized that running had been only the beginning. The real journey into herself, into destiny, into the shadows that shaped her world, was just beginning. Her eyes met his, and in that moment she felt the pulse of something new, a connection forged not by fear, not by obligation, but by the storm, the cliffs, and the shared danger. The Duke's presence was no longer just a threat. It was a guide, a force she could neither flee nor ignore. And then from the mist beyond the plateau, a new sound emerged, soft, almost melodic, yet carrying an eerie echo. It was a voice, distant, singing words that Seraphine could not understand, yet somehow recognized. Her heart skipped a beat, and the hair on her arm stood on end. The Duke's gaze followed hers, and for the first time a shadow of concern crossed his face. "They call to you," he said quietly. "The cliffs, the creatures, the power that stirs within you, they are awake, and they will not wait for hesitation." Seraphine swallowed hard. She had fled from destiny, from fear, from obligation. But now, standing on the hidden plateau with the Duke beside her, she understood that her life, her choices, and her power were tied to forces far greater than herself. Forces that demanded courage, trust, and an acceptance of the unknown. Her fingers tightened on the reins of her mare, and she looked at the Duke. He did not speak, but his presence was a silent promise, that he would not harm her, that he would guide her, and that together they could face the awakening that had already begun. And in that quiet, mist-shrouded moment, Seraphine realized something terrifying and exhilarating. She was no longer running. She was standing at the edge of a new world, and she could not turn back. The wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying voices, shadows, and the hint of a destiny that was neither cruel nor kind, but inevitable. And as Seraphine looked toward the dark horizon, she felt the first spark of understanding. The Duke had not merely caught her. He had brought her to where she needed to be, and she knew, deep in her heart, that the next step would change everything. The mist swirled thick around Seraphine as she stepped carefully along the narrow plateau. Each step felt like treading on the edge of the world, the cliffs plunging into the dark sea below. The melodic voices from the mist rose again, soft and distant, like echoes of a song sung long ago. They were hauntingly beautiful, yet there was something in them that pricked the edge of fear. The Duke rode beside her, silent as always, his horse's hooves making no sound on the wet stone. His cloak flapped lightly in the wind, but his eyes were fixed on the mists ahead, scanning for danger invisible to all but him. Seraphine could not read him. He was a man of many layers, a shadow wrapped in flesh. Yet tonight she sensed the flicker of something almost human in his gaze, a caution, a hope, a trust extended silently to her. "What are they?" she asked softly, her voice barely rising above the wind. "The voices, the creatures." "They are guardians," the Duke said, his tone low, serious, "bound to the cliffs, to the old magic that stirs in this land. They exist to test those who come seeking the path between life and power. Few can hear them, fewer still can understand them. You can." Seraphine's heart jumped. "Me? Why?" He looked at her directly for the first time in hours, and in that gaze she felt a weight of truth she could not ignore. "Because you are not an ordinary noblewoman," he said. "Your blood carries the mark of those who could command or break curses. You have strength hidden even from yourself. Tonight that strength awakens." The words struck her like lightning. She had always felt different, restless, incapable of settling into the narrow life her family had carved for her. But now she realized the truth. She was part of something larger, something older than the kingdom, older than the Duke, older even than her own understanding. Before she could speak, the mist shifted and the creatures emerged fully from the shadows. They were darker now, almost tangible, their forms twisting with smoke and rain. Their eyes glimmered like faint embers, and they moved with intent, circling, watching. The Duke's hand brushed briefly against her arm, steadying her. "Do not be afraid," he said. "They will not harm you unless you show fear. They test your courage, your control, your understanding." Seraphine drew a deep breath. Control, understanding, I do not know if I have either. You do, the Duke said, and you will. But you must let the fear pass through you, not bind you. The creatures shifted closer, and Seraphine felt a strange resonance in her chest. The voices from the mist grew louder, forming words she did not understand, yet somehow knew. A warmth spread from her heart down to her fingertips, subtle at first, then stronger. She realized that her blood, her very essence, was responding to the presence of the creatures, to the cliff, to the storm around them. The Duke nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. Yes, he whispered, feel it. Let it guide you. You are not powerless. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the plateau, scattering the mist and revealing a path that had been hidden, winding downward into the cliffs. The creatures parted just enough to allow them passage, their eyes following, measuring, testing. Seraphine glanced at the Duke. He nodded, and together they began the descent, each step precarious, every movement demanding focus and balance. As they moved deeper into the cliffs, the atmosphere changed. The air grew heavier, thicker, as if infused with the energy of the land itself. Strange carvings appeared on the rock walls, sigils of protection, of binding, of ancient curses. Seraphine felt a shiver run down her spine. These were not just decorations, they were warnings, guides, and perhaps keys. The Duke moved silently, tracing some of the carvings with a gloved hand. These marks tell of a curse that has slept here for centuries, he said quietly. It binds the land, the guardians, and those who come seeking the truth. Few have ever passed its test. Seraphine felt the weight of his words. And we are passing it, she asked, though she did not sound confident. We will, he said. But only because you are ready, whether you know it or not. Your power is awakening. You must trust it and trust yourself. They entered a narrow cavern, lit faintly by a glow that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. The air was thick with the scent of earth and salt, of rain and stone. Seraphine felt her pulse quicken. Something ancient stirred here, a presence that could neither be ignored nor confronted with force alone. The Duke stopped and turned to her, his expression serious. You must face it, he said. The curse, the guardian, whatever you call it. It will come to test your heart, your will. You cannot flee now. This is the moment that decides everything. Seraphine's fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of her cloak. She had fled from so many things in her life, expectations, obligations, fear, but never from herself. And now she was forced to confront something she did not understand, yet felt coursing through her very blood. A low hum began in the cavern, rising slowly, vibrating in her chest. The creatures appeared again, this time fully formed, taller, more solid, their eyes blazing with a strange, otherworldly light. They moved in a slow circle around her, and the Duke, watching, judging, waiting. Close your eyes, the Duke said. Listen to your heart, to your blood, to the voice of the cliffs. It speaks to you. Seraphine closed her eyes, and the world became a swirl of sound and sensation. She felt the stone beneath her feet, the wind on her skin, the pulse of life in the creatures, and a strange warmth in her chest that seemed to grow with each heartbeat. The voices became clearer, their melody weaving through her mind, carrying memories she did not recognize as her own. And then, suddenly, she understood. The creatures were bound by a curse, yes, but the curse could be influenced, shaped by someone strong enough, someone with the blood of old guardians. Seraphine felt her power rise within her, not like fire, not like force, but like water flowing through every vein, every fiber of her being. She understood the song of the cliffs, the rhythm of the guardians, the language of the ancient stones. The Duke's hand found hers, steadying, guiding. Now, he said softly, use it, command it, trust yourself. Seraphine's heart surged and she opened her eyes. The creatures recoiled slightly, sensing the shift in her. She raised a hand, almost instinctively, and a ripple of energy moved through the cavern. The mist twisted, the creatures shivered, and the carvings on the walls glowed faintly, responding to her presence. For a moment she felt pure clarity, a connection to the land, to the guardians, to the ancient power that had lain dormant in her for so long. The Duke watched her, eyes wide not with fear but with awe. He had seen many things, faced many dangers, yet even he seemed impressed by the awakening before him. And then the cavern shook. A deep rumble rolled through the stone, echoing like a drumbeat through the cliffs. The creatures hissed and lunged, not in attack but in challenge. Seraphine's pulse raced. She raised both hands now, feeling the energy of the cliffs flowing through her, guiding her movements, filling her with purpose and strength. The Duke stepped closer, silent and strong, his presence anchoring her even as the storm within the cavern intensified. "Focus," he said. "Control it. Do not let fear take hold." Seraphine nodded, drawing a deep breath. The creatures circled again, eyes bright with challenge, but she did not falter. She felt the pulse of the land, the rhythm of the curse, and the whisper of the ancient guardians in her mind. Slowly, steadily, she directed her newfound power, weaving it into the air, into the mist, into the creatures themselves. The guardians paused, sensing her control, their forms wavering between shadow and substance. The mist swirled around her and the melodic voices grew louder, carrying her power through the cavern, through the cliffs, through the very stones beneath their feet. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The guardians bowed slightly, their forms dissolving back into shadow, their eyes dimming. The cavern quieted. The glow in the stones faded to a soft shimmer, and the hum of the ancient curse receded. Seraphine's knees wobbled as she sank to the ground, exhausted but triumphant. Her hands trembled, still tingling with the residual power that had flowed through her. She looked at the Duke, who knelt beside her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and something deeper, something unspoken. "You did it," he said softly. "You controlled it. You awakened what has lain dormant for centuries, and more than that, you survived it." Seraphine's chest heaved. I felt it," she said. "I could hear them, the cliffs, the guardians, everything. I never knew I could do this." "You were born to it," the Duke said. "The blood in your veins carries what others only dream of, but there is more yet to learn and more yet to face. This was only the beginning." Her gaze fell on him, and for a moment the danger, the storm, the mist, and the cliffs faded. She saw the Duke, not as a shadow, not as a threat, but as a companion, a guide, someone who understood the forces around her in a way she could not yet grasp. And in that quiet moment a bond formed, silent, unspoken, yet stronger than words could capture. The storm had brought them together, the cliffs had tested her, and now the awakening had begun. But even as relief washed over her, a shiver ran down her spine. From the shadows of the cavern, a faint echo of the melodic voices returned, darker this time, deeper, almost warning of a force beyond what they had faced tonight. Seraphine looked at the Duke. "There's more," she said. He nodded. "There always is," he replied. "The awakening never ends, and neither does the danger." For a moment they sat together in silence, the mist curling around them like a living thing. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with power, danger, and choices that could change their world forever. But one truth was undeniable. They would face it together, and in that bond there was hope, fragile, yet unyielding. Dawn broke over the cliffs, pale light spilling over the jagged edges like liquid silver. The storm had passed entirely, leaving only the whisper of wind and the rhythmic crash of waves far below. Seraphine stood at the edge of the plateau, her cloak damp, her hair plastered to her face, her chest still pounding from the trials of the night. The cavern, the guardians, the awakening, all of it seemed like a dream now, yet her muscles remembered every step, every heartbeat, every surge of energy that had flowed through her. Beside her, the Duke dismounted, his dark cloak catching the first light of morning. His eyes, always stormy, now held a quiet intensity, almost vulnerable in their focus on her. He had led her through danger, through the awakening of power, through the shadow of ancient curses, and now he simply stood beside her, silent but unwavering. "You survived the night," he said softly, his voice carrying over the cliffs. And more than that, you commanded what was thought impossible. Few have ever done what you have. Seraphine swallowed hard, glancing at the cliffs and the distant sea. I did not do it alone, she said. You guided me even when I could not trust, even when I feared. You were there. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, I was, and I will be always, but the awakening is not complete. There are forces still at work, choices still to be made. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, where the first hints of light touched the clouds. The wind carried faint echoes, subtle reminders that the land still held secrets. Yet within her, a strange clarity had settled. She no longer felt like a fugitive, fleeing the world and the expectations imposed upon her. She felt like herself, whole, capable, aware of the power and responsibility now hers. The Duke's presence beside her was more than reassurance. It was a tether, an acknowledgement that she was not alone in facing what lay ahead. She could not deny the pull she felt toward him, the admiration, the understanding, and something deeper, almost magnetic, born from shared danger and trust forged in the storm. Tell me, she said after a moment, her voice quiet but firm, what must be done next? The awakening, the guardians, the curse, how do we truly end it? The Duke turned to her fully, his expression unreadable yet intense. We do not destroy it, he said. The curse, the guardians, the power that binds this land, they exist for a reason. They are part of the balance. To end them would be to undo the order of the world itself. What we do is guide it, shape it, restore what has been corrupted. Seraphine frowned slightly. Guide it, shape it. How is that possible? You are the one it chose, he said. Your blood, your courage, your understanding, these are the keys. Tonight you awakened it. Tomorrow you will decide what it becomes. That is the true test of power. A hush fell over the cliffs. The wind softened, the mist faded entirely, and the guardians were gone, leaving only the rhythm of the waves below and the soft, lingering echo of the voices. Seraphine could feel the land beneath her feet, the pulse of life within the stone, and the subtle hum of energy still alive in the air. She felt connected, alive in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. And what of you? She asked finally, her eyes meeting his. Where do you stand in this balance? The Duke looked at her for a long moment, the usual mask of control softened by something sincere. I am here, he said quietly, not as master or ruler, but as partner, as ally. Whatever choice you make, whatever path you follow, I will walk beside you. Her chest tightened. Words failed her, yet her heart understood. Danger and power, fear and awakening had brought them together, and now she could not imagine facing what lay ahead without him. She had fled, run, resisted. But standing here on the cliffs, she realized she had also been seeking something she could not name. Someone who could match her, challenge her, guide her, and yet trust her entirely. The Duke extended a hand, not commanding, not claiming, but offering. Will you trust me, Seraphine? For a moment she hesitated, the memory of fear and flight still fresh. But then she thought of the night, the storm, the cavern, the awakening, the moments when fear had become power and power had become clarity. And she realized that trust was not the absence of danger, but the acceptance of it with someone who understood it alongside her. Slowly she placed her hand in his. The warmth of his grip, the certainty of his presence, and the acknowledgement in his eyes filled her with a sense of peace she had never known. You are ready, he said softly, and together we will face what comes next. They turned back toward the cliffs, moving carefully but with a newfound confidence. The path was treacherous, yet neither feared it now. The awakening had changed her, shaped her into someone capable of embracing both power and responsibility. And the Duke's steady presence beside her made her feel that she was not alone in navigating the unknown. As they descended, the cliffside revealed a hidden grove, illuminated by sunlight filtering through the mist. Strange flowers, glowing faintly, leaned toward the light. The air was filled with the scent of earth and salt, and the pulse of the land beneath them felt steady, almost reassuring. "This is the place," the Duke said quietly, "where the heart of the awakening rests, where the curse can be guided, not destroyed." Seraphine stepped forward, feeling the energy of the grove course through her. The melodic voices returned, faint but steady, and she understood them now, not as threats but as guidance, a language of power older than any human understanding. She raised her hands instinctively, channeling her energy, shaping it as she had done in the cavern. The Guardian's influence was gone, yet their presence lingered in the rhythm of the air, waiting to be acknowledged, not feared. Hours passed, though time seemed meaningless. Seraphine's concentration and the Duke's quiet guidance wove the energy of the land into a new form, one that balanced the Guardians, the curse, and the natural order. She felt exhaustion, yes, but also exhilaration, clarity, and purpose. For the first time, she understood her role, not as a noblewoman fleeing destiny, but as a guardian, a guide, a force within a world that needed balance. Finally, the energy settled, the air quieted, and the grove seemed to sigh, a soft vibration of approval passing through the stones and flowers alike. Seraphine sank to her knees, breath coming in deep, shivering gasps. She had done it. She had guided the awakening, shaped the curse, and survived without harm. The Duke knelt beside her, silent but attentive. He did not speak immediately, only waited, giving her space to recover. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, gentle, and almost awed. "You have done what few could ever dream of. You have balanced the power, guided the curse, and embraced your destiny, and you did it without fear of claiming it as your own." Seraphine looked at him, chest heaving. I never imagined this could be possible. That I could be capable of this." "You always were," he said simply. "You only needed to see it yourself." For a long moment they sat together in the quiet grove, the sunlight warm on their faces, the cliff winds gentle, the world still and balanced. And in that silence, a new understanding passed between them, unspoken, yet undeniable. Danger had brought them together, awakening had tested them, and now, standing at the edge of power and choice, they shared something neither had expected but both had silently sought. Connection, trust, and a bond forged in fire, storm, and shadows. Finally, Seraphine spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "What now?" The Duke's eyes softened, a rare smile touching his lips. "Now," he said, "we step forward together. The world is wide, full of choices, dangers, and power. But we face it not as master and servant, not as pursuer and prey, but as equals, partners in the shaping of fate." Her heart lifted, and she felt a lightness she had never known. The cliffs, the Guardians, the curse, they had tested her, awakened her, and shaped her into someone stronger. And now, with the Duke at her side, she felt capable of facing anything. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint echoes of the melodic voices, now softer like a lullaby of approval. Seraphine breathed deeply, feeling the power of the land within her, the clarity of her purpose, and the quiet, unwavering presence of the Duke beside her. They rose together, hands brushing, eyes meeting in silent acknowledgement. There was danger yet to come, challenges yet to face, but for the first time they were not afraid. The awakening had shown her what she was capable of, and the bond they shared gave her the courage to embrace it fully. As they began the descent back to the castle, the cliffs no longer seemed threatening, no longer seemed like a place of flight and fear. They were a place of power, of understanding, of connection, and of choice. Seraphine's heart felt steady, her mind clear, and her spirit alive in a way she had never imagined possible. The Duke rode beside her, silent, yet present in every sense, and she realized something profound. Destiny was no longer a chain. It was a path, and she could walk it with purpose, courage, and the strength to shape it as she wished. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the sea, she felt it, the quiet, unshakable truth that no storm, no shadow, no fear could ever undo. She was awake, she was powerful, and she was not alone.